Just over a year ago, the unimaginable happened to more than 14 million people living in the central Philippines. Typhoon Haiyan struck with so much power that thousands died and more than 4 million people were displaced. There was a global relief effort in the immediate aftermath of the typhoon, but today survivors still rely on help. CCTV's Barnaby reports.
This is Tacloban City shoreline today, glistening with metal sheets on top of houses. Houses crowded along the banks, they almost look like they're floating on water. But further inland, a reminder. This is one of a number of ships that were swept to the ground by water that rose several meters high, created by Typhoon Haiyan, one of the most powerful storms ever recorded. It remains anchored in the same spot, just as these residents continue to live along waters that a year ago almost swallowed the entire city. The bulk of the death and destruction from Typhoon Haiyan came from tsunami-like storm surges. That's prompted officials to designate permanent no-build zones. Now, the general rule is to disallow structures 40 meters from the coastline, but there are exceptions. This area, however, obviously isn't one of them.
Of course we worry, especially when it rains, but what can we do? We have nowhere else to go.
Our vice mayor told us to stay put because they haven't found a place to move us.
Former senator, now rehabilitation czar, Panfilo Lacson admits finding relocation sites has been a major challenge. In addition, he says, the region's geography may not allow for a strict 40-meter no-build rule.
It should be based on science, not based on the distance. The 40-meter no-build zone, that's according to the water code of the Philippines. But to us, it's impractical because even if you are more than 40 meters, even 1 kilometer away from the coastline, and if you are vulnerable to other hazards like erosion or landslides or volcano eruption.
And so while finding safe, suitable relocation sites has been taking time, hundreds of families in Tacloban alone continue to live in tents, right where they lost their homes, and in many cases, just a few meters away from the sea.
It's very hot inside the tent, so we usually hang out outside. I hope we can transfer to one of those temporary shelters because it's scary here because we're so close to the sea. Strong winds can be very traumatizing, and when they come with the heavy rain, our tent would shake really violently.
These bunkhouses are the temporary shelters Lago was referring to. They're by no means architectural masterpieces. Far from it, in fact. But for someone like Emilita Abude, who's lost everything, a roof over her family's head is all she needs for now. She feels safe here, she says, even though she's pointed out to me how thin these wooden panels are. Punch a hole and you'll see right through. Conditions in these quarters would have been worse, though. According to Secretary Lacson, his office hadn't discovered an anomaly that led to substandard construction.
The funds allocated for bunkhouses is supposed to be 836,000 pesos per bunkhouse unit. And after the investigation was conducted by the CIDG, we found out that, or they concluded that only 500,000 pesos was spent to construct the bunkhouses. So ergo, the conclusion was indeed substandard materials were used and monies were not spent properly.
But because the law gives contractors 90 days to make amends, no one was held accountable. The United Nations says the bunkhouses have been deemed acceptable.
They decided that the smaller families were going to occupy the smaller houses, so the standards can be followed. In the Typhoon Kaloy, we had the chance of testing them. So we made a correction and we established some braces, even in Glenda, where there were a lot of wind in the city, but there was no news of destruction of bunkhouses.
But what if there were no temporary shelters to begin with? In Tanawan, not far from Tacloban, the local government has been moving survivors to solid concrete houses permanently.
Moving them to a temporary housing will mean we have to relocate or dislocate them twice, right? The other one is we actually look for a place that's not very far from the livelihood location.
And talk about building back better. These houses are designed to withstand wind and rain the intensity of Typhoon Haiyan.
You see how thick is this? Okay, this is not ordinary hollow block, which is 4 inches. This is 6 inches. You see the gutter, the design of the gutter. It covers now the roofing. I believe that's part of the resiliency design. When you expose your roof, there's a greater tendency for that to be destroyed when strong wind.
Mayor Texon says they're building 1,500 of these houses. But Tanawan is just one out of several towns and cities devastated by Typhoon Haiyan. In all, more than 4 million people lost their homes. The national government says it is just a matter of time before they're provided with sturdy, permanent houses. But the question is, when? Because if Haiyan is the new normal, as they say, these survivors may not stand a chance when the next big one hits. Barnaby, CCTV, Leyte, the Philippines.